Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm good. So this
We
is Better Life Through Arts and Self-Reliance, or as we call ourselves, two wordsmiths and a wolfhound.
and our wolfhound is right here.
The wolfhound is right here.
She's right off camera and she would
Right.
like a treat. So now you can sort of see the top part of her.
She's a very vital part of the whole program.
Yes, indeed. As is this wine. that we
Yes,
have.
yes. What are we drinking tonight?
Tuscan Hills Winery. We have a Tuscan pink wine, which is a nice wine. It's one of the best effing wines we ever had, which might sound weird until you realize it's from a winery in Effingham, Illinois. And so we have great fun punching, poking fun at the best effing winery.
We don't typically like to swear here,
It's
but
true.
when you've got a town named Effingham, you just can't help but talk about the best effing winery.
And no matter how
As
we
their
tried,
t-shirts say.
it's true. No matter how we tried, we could not find that Effingham. So, and here we are.
We found no Effingham, we found no effing turkey, we found no effing anything really, except the
It's
effing
true.
wine.
But we did find our wolfhound and we
Yep.
brought her back home.
Well,
So-
we found her a long time before that.
It's true. So, a better life through arts and self-reliance. Laura, what does that mean?
Well, to me, it means that arts and self-reliance are two things that bring happiness. And one of the phrases that jumped out at me many years ago, this was said by Dennis Prager, but I believe it's much, much older than that, probably going back to antiquity, was that happiness is a moral obligation. And, in this day and age, I think at first that sounds a little funny to people, like, why is that a moral obligation? But the reason is, if you go around being miserable all the time, you're spreading misery to everyone. And I don't think that's the moral thing to do. If you are cheerful and happy, if you find joy, then you're also giving happiness and joy to other people. You're making their lives better.
Mhm.
And so that's why happiness is a moral obligation.
I think it's a very good point. I think this idea of self-reliance or reliance is also very important as well. It provides security and happiness. What else does reliance
Well, I
provide us?
think it provides, as you say, security. And when you feel secure, you're going to be happier. You're going to have a better life, when your life is in upheaval. And I think that pretty much everybody out there knows the past 22 months or so, there has been a lot of upheaval. There have been a lot of people who suddenly lost their jobs. There have been people even now who are facing losing their jobs. And what do you do when all of a sudden the entire system that you knew is crumbling beneath you and you may not have that steady paycheck? And in fact, that's something we're looking at too. Are we going to suddenly, I've looked at it myself, about 20 months ago, I suddenly lost 95% of my income. I don't want to exaggerate and say I lost my whole income. Let's not, be facetious here.
Told you a million times not to lie like that.
I only lost 95% of my income, and when you look at life with an attitude of, okay, I can take care of myself rather than depending on someone else, that's a lot more security, and that gives you a lot more peace of mind to think, not, oh no, what am I going to do? But let me think about what I'm going to do, and I can take care of myself.
Yes, very much. It's about independence. It's about self-sufficiency. But I think also, we might consider that some of those seem kind of hard. It's also about having a joyful life, a full life, one that is a faithful life, that's also full of family, friends, and very much focuses, by the way, on freedom and firearms as well, when we get right down to it, because all of these things play together and create that idea of real self-reliance and real independence. Anything else to add to that?
Well, the reason we brought arts into this, why we're talking about happiness through the arts and self-reliance, is arts bring happiness. And this is very, very personal to me because, I think that some people really spend a great part of their lives trying to figure out what it is they want to do. I was very blessed in a way that I knew from the time I was 8 and 10, I wanted to write and I wanted to play music. And the flip side of that, the not so good side was, I was being raised by a military officer as my father, and he very much thought that what we do in our lives is we use our brain to become, a CEO, a military officer, a brain surgeon, a lawyer, something important. And so this was, to me, a very profound thing that I had to deal with in my life, that what I was called to do was not regarded as important. And as I grew older, I really came to understand that the arts, that music, that writing, that novels, poetry, all of these things really are important because, yes, we need doctors to take care of our bodies, our physical health. We do need the military to take care of our protection. They're very, very important. We need the businessmen, but the businessmen and the soldiers and the doctors, they need the artists too to feed their soul, because we are both body and soul. And one of the things, years ago when the movie, do you remember Dirty Dancing?
Indeed,
Like,
I
who
do.
doesn't? Who doesn't remember Dirty Dancing? Nobody puts baby in a corner. And there's a part of that movie where there's a very snide comment made where baby is going to save the world. She's going into the Peace Corps or whatever.
Mhm.
And when this waiter asks, and what is Lisa, her sister, going to do? Baby very snidely says, she's going to decorate it.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody sneered at Lisa. But as I grew older, I thought, it's important.
Mhm.
What does it do to our souls to live in a cement block?
Mhm.
Cement sidewalks and cement walls and no decoration. Our spirits crave decoration. They need it.
Mhm.
I mean, this is, if you go to a gulag, this is one of the things that crushes the spirit and destroys people, is
Very
that
much.
they're enclosed in a cement block with
Mhm.
nothing but gray everywhere. So, it's important to be a missionary, to be in the Peace Corps. All of these things are important, but putting beauty into the world is also important.
Yes, and I'd like to comment also on the connecting the idea of self-reliance to wordsmithing. When you actually write, that entire process comes from within. It comes from what you're doing in your own mind, reacting to the world around you and inventing worlds as you might need to in order to finish the story. And I think that idea of smithing words is very important in this way as well, because it speaks to the idea of the genesis of survival from within ourselves. And that's an aspect, I think, that you're really going to see the focus on in this ongoing series of podcasts, is this idea of how we rely on ourselves to get things done. I'd like to quote you a passage from this book, North of Reliance, by David Oleson. This is a person who moved up to near Yellowknife on Great Slave Lake in the Northwest Territories and built his own cabin on Hoarfrost River. And he writes about what Captain George Back meant in 1833 when he named his camp at the head of Carleton Bay, Fort Reliance. Reliance on what, Captain, or upon whom? Other posts up there had interesting names such as Fort Enterprise, Fort Resolution, Fort Good Hope. All of these were in the Northwest Territories. Well, in his narrative of the Arctic land expedition, Captain Back wrote, on the 5th of November, we had the pleasure of changing our cold tents for the comparative comfort of the house, which, like most of those in this country, was constructed of a framework, filled up with logs let into grooves, and closely plastered with a cement composed of common clay and sand. As every post in this country is distinguished by a name, I gave to ours that of Fort Reliance, in token of our trust in that merciful providence whose protection we humbly hoped would be extended to us in the many difficulties and dangers to which these services are exposed. And if you think about the early 19th century and this idea of difficulties and dangers, he was no Arctic tenderfoot. On his earlier expedition, he had endured a few of the highlights of this British barren land in this part of the world, including forced marches, frostbite, a crew of mutinous, starving voyageurs on the brink of murder and cannibalism. He knew what he was up against, and he clearly knew upon whom he relied. Merciful Providence. I think the only voyageurs on the brink of murder and cannibalism we have here are perhaps an errant black bear in search of a berry or two. But we do,
Okay,
we do
please
have
don't
them.
say that. You keep assuring me the bears are not going to eat me out there. And now I'm not going to leave the house for a week and a half now that you said that.
Right, exactly. But this idea of connecting our reliance to providence, I think, is very important and is foundational to the work that you're going to see us do.
So we should introduce ourselves, who we are, two wordsmiths and a wolfhound. And of course, I'm totally bribing the wolfhound.
This is our wolfhound, Leodin,
come into the camera
our
again.
gray Irish lady.
Yes, she is 7 years old. And for an Irish wolfhound, that's quite up there in years, but she is very lively and full of energy and very loving and affectionate. Yes, here you are. So as to wordsmiths, Chris, do you want to show your book that you
Yes.
wrote?
So I am Chris Powell, and this is Laura Powell, here, also known as Laura Vosica in her authorly world, and she will speak to that in a second. I happen to have one book here called The Path That Shines. This also features my artwork on the front cover. This is a memoir, a medical memoir of my late first wife's autoimmune illness and the power that she left behind in terms of the strength that she conveyed to our daughter, Emily, and to me by virtue of her extensive suffering and ultimately loss, which, as we were getting closer to the end, we knew about. And so still, she hung on longer than anyone expected. And again, conveyed that idea of a lot of power and strength. And I wanted to write to that from a couple of different angles. One was for the medical profession, because they were having a tough time dealing with this illness, but also for caregivers in case you happen to have a family member or yourself with a very difficult medical condition. This can offer a lot of ideas for hope and coping with that as well. Now, this is just one book. Laura happens to have many, many more. And so we'll allow her to
we'll
introduce
sort of
them.
transition with our joint book. This is on Wings of Love and Light. I can never remember if it's Light and Love or Love and Light, but it's Love and Light. And this is a collection of poetry and essays on the subject of love and what love really is, as compared to perhaps the overly romanticized notions that society often has. We have put together this book, Poetry in Motion, by our photography company, Manual's Light. And so what this book does is it puts some of our photography together with poems. And so again, what we were aiming for in this book is the idea of beauty, both in photography and in poetry. And so a lot of these photographs were taken actually in Scotland, if you have any interest in Scotland, many of them in the lands of Robert the Bruce.
Yes, indeed.
And
even on the back cover, a beautiful picture that was actually taken on Donald Trump's golf course over there. We didn't know, but at the time we drove across this golf course and ended up in a little bit of trouble for that on our way to Robert the Bruce's castle. And this is one of the pictures we took on that famed golf course.
So, and interestingly enough, having just come off the conference with Stephen Turley of Turley Talks, we had a video about Braveheart, William Wallace. And so anyone who knows that history, which I'm assuming most people don't, but I do, what's his name? Robert the Bruce.
Yes.
Robert the Bruce. I can't.
Our good friend, Robert the Bruce.
Right, my good friend Robert the Bruce. He's my favorite, apart from James Douglas. Robert the Bruce sort of picked up where Braveheart William Wallace left off. And so these were the lands of Robert the Bruce that Chris and I were on. And we didn't realize that they were actually privately owned now by Donald Trump. And so we were happily taking photographs of this amazing place where Turnberry Castle was, where Robert the Bruce played as a child. And luckily, it was only as we were leaving that somebody saw us and said, "You're not really supposed to be here." So among some of my projects, I curate an annual anthology, and these are collections of new poetry in classical styles, because I believe that there is a lot to be learned from working in classical forms. I believe free form poetry can be very good, but I think that the very best free form poetry is written by people who have also mastered forms. And I think there's a lot of beauty in these forms. So going back to, the ideas we're talking about. One of my recent books is a journal, and this is called The Four Spheres. It's based on a very old idea propagated by many philosophers, that in our daily lives, we really need to address 4 areas of our being in order to be healthy. And that's healthy emotionally, healthy spiritually, healthy physically, and I'll have to open up my own book to remember the 4th. Mentally, yes. So it's a journal designed to sort of help you develop this habit of doing something mental, doing something physical, doing something that is emotionally satisfying, and doing something physical each day. So, and then the main body of my work is a saga, a 5-book saga, and I only have 2 of the books here. That is the Bluebells Chronicles, and it is the story of an arrogant modern trombonist, and I repeat myself.
It's a little redundant, don't you think?
Right. Chris and I both play trombone. Chris and I both play organ. We're like probably the only 2 people in the world who played both trombone and organ, which is why, we ended up stuck with each other.
I love this book so much, I narrate the author.
But it's the story of a modern man. And there is an old saying that, let me see if I can get this right. Hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make hard times, and then we repeat, hard times make strong men. And so this is the story of a modern musician who has grown up in our times, which frankly, modern America in many ways, up until recently, has been a very, very easy place to live in. And he's not a very nice person. And as a result of this, as a result of some other things, he is left by his girlfriend in a Scottish tower, and he wakes up in the wrong century. He wakes up in the time of Robert the Bruce, hence why we were on the lands of Robert the Bruce photographing. And he experiences a time that is very difficult. It's a time that has people who are very full of faith, but it's also a very difficult time, and he really has to face who he's been and reassess his values and look at the life that he's been leading and face the fact that he's hurt a lot of people. And so despite that sounding like a very heavy sort of a story, I find it a very funny story too. Sean is the life of the party. And so he and Neil kind of play off each other, as they come to terms. Neil is a very devout man in the time of Robert the Bruce. And so there's a very strong learning curve there and growth process in who they are.
I particularly like the character of Angus, the intrepid policeman, who was also intrepidly trying to go after one of the protagonists of the book. But I always loved how he was so prepared in every circumstance. Literally in one one fine scene where he managed to materialize a lifeboat complete with motor out of the back of his small car.
Well, I think you're being a little unjust. He knew what he was planning on doing, and therefore he made a point of putting the lifeboat in there. So that's not really fair. However, that is why we call ourselves two wordsmiths. And the wolfhound is now sleeping on the floor at our feet outside of range of the camera.
Yes, indeed. Well, back to the topic at hand. What will we be doing on this podcast, Laura, in terms of, some of the topics that we'll be exploring?
Well, we will be focusing on happiness or a better life through the arts and self-reliance. And so as a result, we will be reviewing books. We will be talking about arts and literature and music. We will be posting some of our music. We are both musicians. As I mentioned, we both play trombone, but you know the definition of a gentleman, don't you? One who can play trombone, but doesn't.
So what's your excuse?
Definition of a lady, one who can play trombone, but doesn't. So we promise not to play trombone for you. Maybe we actually do own a sackbut, which is a medieval trombone. But we will be posting some music, both music that we've written, music that we have played. So one of the things I do because of my writing is I play medieval and Scottish music that I played in medieval and Scottish locations. So we'll post some of those that are currently on my other YouTube channel. We will post music that Chris has composed. If I can ever dig it up after our most recent move, I might make Chris learn to play some of the pieces I composed because he's the pianist and I am not. And so we'll be posting book reviews, music, and we will be posting pieces on self-reliance as we ourselves work on laying out and planting our garden on the acreage that we just bought, as we have been in the process of building a gun range, as we have been in the process of working on many things that lead to self-reliance. For instance, just tonight I've been looking at how to build a greenhouse. And we live in a northern climate up here in northern Duluth, or northern Minnesota, which, near Duluth. And so we have some sort of specialized needs for a greenhouse. So we'll be talking about these sorts of things that lead to self-reliance and hopefully help everybody else out there also get some ideas for self-reliance and more happiness and joy in life.
And plus, it allows me to use and buy more tools. And as every man knows, he who dies with the most tools wins.
I thought you were going to say it's an excuse to buy more wine.
You're here.
Cheers.
So what will be our next topic for our next wonderful podcast that we'll have?
I believe the next topic coming up is a very heavy topic. It's a very thick tome.
It's a very beautiful topic.
It is a beautiful topic. We'll be talking about the book Evidential Power of Beauty, written by Father Thomas Dubay. And as our viewers will soon learn, I often read books by handing them to Chris, and he shreds them in, a couple of hours and tells me what was in them.
Which I committed the cardinal sin of book reading, which was to dog-ear the utter heck out of this book.
I do that too, though. I believe books are to be used. They're to learn from. So,
I think I heard it said once that there are two types of people in the world: those who don't dog-ear books and monsters.
See, I heard it the other way. There are two types of people in the world: those who don't dog-ear books and monsters. I believe in using them. I believe books are a source of knowledge, and knowledge gives us wisdom. Therefore, they are to be used and learned from. And a dog-eared book to me is a good thing.
Well, and for Leodin, I think we have reached the end of our podcast here today. And we will now sign off. So Chris and Laura Powell, or Laura Vosica in our authorly world, we will see you next time. Thank you.